Welcome to the JB Media Digital Drop-In. This is our monthly webinar, and we're so glad to have everyone here. So today we're going to be talking about the art of UX and the basics of website usability. This is a discussion that I'm really excited to have. So just a couple housekeeping things I want to go over, since I know a few of you may be new to the webinars that we do every month. If you'd like to ask a question during the call, please feel free to use the chat feature. There are some other features where you can raise your hand and ask questions that way. I will do my best to monitor that as well. But typically we have our chat going, so if you can submit your questions there, that'll be great. And it will alert us when the chat pops up. So we'll check it and make sure that we answer any questions that you have. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. And also for those of you who are here for the first time, you will get an email with a copy of this recording as well as a download of all of the slides that we're going to share today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Benoit. I'm the co-founder and lead instructor of the JB Media Institute, and I am usually hosting these webinars every month. We talk about a wide variety of subjects, so hopefully if you haven't attended one before, you'll continue joining us the first Wednesday of every month in the future. And today I'm really excited to have not only somebody who is a colleague and professional that I really respect, but just one of my personally favorite people in the world, Heather Neff, with me from Neff Creative. And she specializes in UX design. I'm just really thrilled to have her join us today to talk about this topic in more depth. But go ahead and introduce yourself, Heather.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here. And thanks, Sarah, for such a lovely thing to say about me. A little bit about my company. Neff Creative helps small businesses from the very beginning by designing your logos, your branded materials, and your website. We kind of work with you to launch your business together. We also love working with established businesses who are ready to invest in their future. We specialize in Squarespace websites, logos, and user experience design for websites.
Awesome. So, and can you share with everybody just a little about your sort of background and experience with this topic?
Yeah, so I'm a digital marketing manager and specialize in UX or user experience design. And kind of bring all that experience from my background is in user interface design. So for 20 years, I've been in Photoshop laying out all kinds of websites. And from that experience, I was able to figure out what people are expecting in a layout and so forth. So I'm originally from Boston and now live and work in the Asheville area. And so I kind of offer that same expertise to small businesses.
Awesome. So this is something that I think makes you a little unique compared to a lot of the other designers that I have worked with in the past, just because I think that UX is sort of a unique space in the design world. And I think it's a really important space that all of us should be learning about, but it's still considered kind of a specialty. So could you just share what is UX? Because I think we're going to talk about website usability today, but the core of where website usability comes from is really user experience.
Right. So user experience design, UX, or customer experience, is the process of enhancing the customer's satisfaction by improving the usability, accessibility, and pleasure provided in the interaction between the customer and your website. Depending on how your website or software is designed, the user experience can range from delightful to downright frustrating. UX design isn't limited to digital space either. Anything that can be experienced can be designed, from the packaging of a toy to the dashboard of your car. However, this is usually how your customer experiences your brand when visiting your website and trying to interact with your company online. So basically, it's really coming in to become your customer and put yourself in their shoes and experience the website from outside your company by really almost pretending to be a customer of yours and figuring out how your website works and how it makes them feel, actually. It's about an emotional response we get from their website.
And really quick, I just want you to talk really quickly about what user interface design was.
Right.
So when we just to sort of relate that to UX.
Right. So user interface, or UI, is basically the graphical layout that usually is done in a program such as Adobe XD or Adobe Photoshop, where we would actually lay out where the navigation, where the buttons are, the colors of everything, the logo. We'd actually in pixels create the entire website, and that would be called the user interface. And so usually UX and UI are married together because you need everything to look professional, and the user experience designer will work with a UI or the same person. So I'm a UI UX designer, so I do both. And so that's my background, is I come in from being a user interface designer, and that's how I've learned a lot more about what the user expects and what the user wants and what the customers want to do within an interface.
Mm-hmm. And this is something I think we've talked about in classes before, in the sense that when it comes to tracking and reporting and collecting data now, we're not just looking at what people do, but we're really trying to understand why they have certain behaviors.
Exactly.
And that's where I think the UX really comes into play. It's understanding the driving motivations that people have for making certain decisions, and even understanding their expectations.
Exactly.
And so what are they used to, and what do they expect to see on websites?
Right. So people create thoughts and emotions based on their experiences. All it takes is for one bad experience for someone to decide not to call you back or leave a permanent scathing review on the internet. So now Google actually uses your mobile site speed as the number one determiner of a quality site, as it's all about how long people have to wait to see your site load on their phones. So that's the very first experience they have, is like looking at your website on a phone. How long does it take? That's exactly the biggest problem we have right now, is that's how Google's actually really responding to how well you rank, is how fast does it load? Because that's the first experience they have. If they have to wait around, it's a bad experience.
So Sarah, I see your question, and today we're actually going to cover the basics of website usability. That's what the call is about. But to get us started in the beginning of the call, we're just sort of discussing where website usability comes from. And the whole sort of study of usability is really born out of UX and UI and kind of the understanding of people's behaviors with a variety of digital and technological tools. And so that's why I'm having Heather explain a little bit about UX in general, and then we're going to dig into website usability specifically. Does that make sense? Great. So again, just to Sarah's point, UX applies, like you said, to more than just websites. It can apply to mobile apps and all sorts of software and all sorts of other things.
It applies to everything we do, actually. I mean, everything you do and go in the world, you experience the world around you. So one of my favorite examples is going into a restaurant. When you walk into the restaurant, you are judging everything from the wait staff to the food to how clean the bathroom is. Everything is going to make you judge that restaurant on your experience. And so, if the music's too loud and you can't hear the people you're trying to have dinner with, that's a bad experience. Or if the food's not very good, or if the wait staff isn't very good, you judge these things, and that's your experience. So things like that in the real world are part of what a user experience can do. Like, I could walk into a restaurant and tell them feedback on, I couldn't read the fonts on your menu. It was too difficult. So we need to work on this, and we can improve all these different aspects. So real world user experience applies to every business and every platform you can think of. Of course, it applies to websites and mobile apps, and this we're going to be talking about today, but we're also saying that it applies to the entire world as we walk through it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this is an important thing to remember, because from my perspective, when it comes to marketing, we talk a lot about consistency, and that it's important for brands, businesses, organizations to understand that the experience people have on your website needs to sort of go along with the experience they have when they call you on the phone.
Exactly.
Needs to go along with the experience they have when they walk into your office or into your location, and that there should be some level of consistency across all of those sort of digital and non-digital interactions that people have.
Exactly. Consistency of your marketing and your branding is also kind of just showing that professional imagery, because people do judge you within like 6 seconds on how you look. And how you look is so important for people to have an impression or an emotional response to you. So having that professional branding and consistency across your social media and, of course, your website and everything else you do is really a powerful way of looking professional and being professional, and also following up with your customer service, and that being professional is also very, very crucial to everything for the user's experience.
I personally really love what you're saying, just because, and this is why I've been so fascinated by UX and just studying that whole concept, because I really believe marketing and customer service should be considered the same thing. I don't think that, they've always been sort of separate departments.
Right.
When you look at corporate, larger companies, and I feel like there's a lot of times where marketing people are never having any meetings with the people who actually manage the customer service. And I think that's a big gap in understanding your customers and their needs and what they're looking for, what they want, how to best serve them. It's, sometimes hard, I think, when marketing people are sitting in some room talking to each other, and they're never interacting with the people that actually connect with the customers on a regular basis. And I think UX challenges us to ask those questions.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later about how to do surveys and ask your actual customers how they respond to things.
Great. So I have a few questions before we dig into your slides that I just wanted you to give your professional thoughts on. So one is, why is UX important? We just talked about how it's now sort of something that infiltrates all different aspects of the world as, people go through their experiences in all sorts of situations. But why do you really think it's important?
Well, I think it's a great question. UX designers make technology more accessible, which means they are making the web easier for people of different ages, nationalities, levels of education, and their physical and mental disabilities. They respond by designing ways to make digital products both useful and beautiful. This affects every website you interact with, every app you use, and pretty much anything else you can experience in the real world. So pretty much it's a really crucial way to make everything better,
Yeah, that's, I think, what is so amazing and why I felt like that question is so valuable, because really, like you said, it's about making the world a better place at the end of the day.
It's for everybody. It's efficiency, and it's making everything work better, to save time, to speed things up, to make it pleasurable so that you have a great life. It's about everyone enjoying their time interacting with the mobile app that they have, or whatever it is that they're interacting with. It doesn't matter what it is. It's always better to improve the user's experience.
So that leads us into my second question, which is, how do you feel UX is impacting the world? And we talked about this question the other day, that this is a weighty question.
This is a big
question.
So
I want you all to know, we're going to give a simple answer to this, but if you explore this topic, there's actually a lot of people out there having this particular conversation based on what we just said. How do we use the UX perspective to literally make the world a better place? So what do you think about that?
Well, there's so many aspects to it, as we kind of explained already, that every decision that people make. So for an example, I was reading this article the other day, and what they were saying was that a manager actually has a role to play in the user's experience, because when they're deciding what stays and what goes within a mobile app or within the website, they're making decisions that can override what the designers are feeling or the user experience designers are feeling, and that can really impact how people respond. Another example is the people who are in charge of the finances. They're some of the biggest decision makers of how that experience is going to go, because if you cut a budget in half, there's going to be, things are going to be cut, and that's going to impact the bottom line of how that app works, or the websites, the services are good. And so, these financial decisions actually play a huge role in the real world of how we develop programs and work with the government and do all these different things that require a whole team of people to make decisions together. And so if you're not thinking about the consumer or the customer or the client, you're not really doing a justice to everybody out there.
Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to moving into what our conversation is mostly going to cover for the rest of the call, which is web design, development, and website usability, how is UX as sort of a bigger industry impacting our work in that world?
Well, UX is probably the most important thing you can be doing for your company, as it directly impacts your site speed, your Google rankings, and your conversion rates. We'll be discussing in detail today the marriage that needs to take place for both the customer's experience to be amazing and what developers need to do for Google at the same time, as good UX equals really good SEO.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge point. Being an SEO expert, there was a whole time period in my career where usability and user experience were not part of the conversation.
Right, didn't even exist, yeah. So.
And we made a lot of bad decisions in the SEO world. And I feel like this is why things that when Justin and I, and for those of you who don't know, Justin Bellamy is the co-founder of the JV Media Institute. He's usually with us, but he's out of the office today. But essentially, him and I talk about how when we both started in search engine optimization, you did all these sort of tricks and all these kind of things to make Google like you more. And what we discovered about 10 years into the industry, which was we were actually ruining people's experience. We were actually hurting them.
Right.
And I think that's why Google, some of the best practices that we had in 2003, 2005, 2007, those things will literally get you banned on Google now.
Yep.
Like the things that they used to say were the best practice in SEO are now things that you would never ever do. And a lot of that was from Google actually realizing we were ruining people's experience.
Yep.
So the last question I want to ask before we dig into your slides is a key thing that I think people have to be aware of, which is, are all designers and developers knowledgeable about UX?
No. In fact, it's my mission here today to educate everyone on what user experience is and why they need to learn about it. Most people stare blankly at me when I say I'm a UI UX designer. They've never even heard of it. So many web developers out there kind of are really focusing on the visual branding of their website, and they forget about what the customer is trying to do on the site itself. And many programmers really care about the functionality, but they forget about how it should look and how it should feel. And so right now you need to make sure that your team is aware that if they don't have a user experience designer who's kind of helping map out how the customer comes through the website, that's really a crucial functionality. And so many people have never even heard of what UX is, that when I introduce that to the topic to them, I have to explain what my job is and how it works. And they're like, that's interesting. I never thought about that before. And I think that if you don't know what UX is, you're doing your company an injustice to not really learn what that means and what you should be doing for your customers.
Yeah, because like I said, I think UX bleeds into a lot of different aspects of business in general nowadays, especially because the marketplace, no matter who you are, the people that you're serving have many, many options. Typically, you are not the only option they have. So that user experience is going to affect their decisions.
Exactly.
And Megan, I see your comment about how content strategy and information architecture are huge UX components that relate to SEO as well, and that they're the foundational building blocks to a great UX experience. So absolutely, I think information architecture, which is a huge sort of piece of the puzzle for making sure that you just understand how your website flows and how it's built and directly relates to SEO as far as giving what I call purpose to every page of your website. That's something I talk a lot about now with website design clients, is what is the purpose of each page? We no longer live in a world where every page of your website is laid out exactly the same.
Yep.
We have to think about the fact that every page of your website is a potential doorway into your website. And when people hit that page for the first time, what do we want them to do? How do we get them to go to that next step? And how do we give them exactly, like I said, what they need or want or expected?
Exactly. You want to make sure that the customer, when they come in the door, is kind of guided along too to answer these questions they have. So some of these questions we have up on the screen are exactly what we should be trying to answer as a UX designer, is really caring about why they're there in the first place. What are they looking for? What kind of problems are they trying to solve? Are they trying to accomplish a goal? What do they really want? And then also what we want to do is, why are you different from your competitors? Like what makes you stand out? What are your services in some way that really make you different and better? And then also the professional image of everything. So we want to make sure that the site looks really well branded and it's clean and easy to read, and it just looks really good. And then of course functionality. I can't stress this enough. You need to test your forms, you need to test your forms, you need to test your forms, and then you need to test them again, because there's so many things that can go wrong through different browsers and different types of technology that you got to make sure everything's working, and don't assume that it's going to work the second time or the third time you do the same thing. And then also the most important thing is, how fast is the site loading? That's the number one thing we got to worry about, and that's what we're going to be talking a lot about today, is how to speed up your site, because Google's really truly caring about that. It's like their number one thing is, how fast is this website? So this is a little bit of thing I'd like to read. Design the website for the user, not the company. Make everything easy for them. Customers experience your website based on their interactions from an emotional response they have. Create a positive response by designing a user interface that is professional, clear, and exudes trust. So the trust part is also a really important factor. You want to make sure they feel comfortable, that it's not sketchy in any way, that they're able to give a credit card without a bunch of hoops to jump through, and it's not something that's scary in any way. And you want everything to really feel just really professional.
Mm-hmm. And I think, too, this goes back to the importance, which I think we all know, which is you have to know your audiences pretty well, because different audiences define something like sketchy differently, right? So I feel like we see that with different age groups. We see that with different, rural versus more metropolitan or urban areas. You just have to think about, where is that person coming from, because what they define as trustworthy is sometimes a little different than maybe what you think is.
True.
And, I think sometimes, we get into a mindset when we're marketers in a silo where we start to think like our definition of that stuff is everybody's definition. I feel like when I work with clients on websites, I run into that all the time. They're like, well, this is how it is. And I'm like, that's not necessarily how it is. That's how it is for you. Exactly. But let's think about the person you're trying to attract. Exactly.
So we'll talk a little bit about how to define those people as a user persona as well. But this screen is talking about the basics of UX. One of my favorite mottos is "Don't make me think." It means don't make them think. Users are really coming in quick. They usually browse. They usually don't read. And, you don't want to have complex language that, is too educational in some facts. You want to keep it really easy to understand and use plain language. So these are kind of like the basics, which means to make sure your site's loading super fast. It's responsive, meaning that it's going to resize on tablet and mobile. When it is on mobile, you want to make sure that it's going to be touchscreen friendly so that it pops open your email and your phone number. You want to have intuitive navigation. I can't tell you how many times I've changed navigation, both for SEO and for just kind of the ease of use and how it makes sense to the user, like making sure that the folders and drop downs are labeled correctly so you know what's going to be in there, and kind of just rearranging things and renaming things so that makes sense to people. If you have your own industry terms, it's not a good idea to put that in there if they don't know what that is. So, animations are also something that can be done too much or too little, especially in a mobile app. And then, of course, you want to have really good branding and clean layouts in plain language. Your call to actions should also be labeled. This is a kind of an important thing. Google's now really being very kind of wanting people to do this, which is to describe your links, especially within the button. So learn more is actually not the best practice anymore. Now it's actually something like discover applications. They want to tell you what's going to be on the other side of that link. And so I highly suggest that you go through all your buttons that say learn more or contact us and so forth, and kind of think about what is really on the other side of that page? Where are you linking them? And can you describe that beforehand so they don't waste time clicking through to that page? Customer service also has to be easy to find. It needs to be responsive and timely. You need to have somebody who's really going to be helpful and goes above and beyond, is going to be patient, and just going to really be a fantastic experience with your customer service. And then, of course, the company should be following up with a thank you message or some type of, follow up with the customer. And then I also suggest setting up drip campaigns, which are emails that are set up to be automated to send out after someone signs up for a newsletter or they make a purchase. You get some type of automated email that keeps them in the loop and keeps them as a customer, and then maybe an incentive is being sent to them. All right, so this is a little case study. So the other day I was working with my client and I had been told to go set up an account in MailChimp. And when I did so, they hadn't quite set up the forwarding email in the back end, so it didn't go anywhere. And I spent a half an hour on MailChimp's website trying to find customer service. And I went through and tried their social media channels. And the only way that I could get a hold of tech support was on their Facebook and going into a previous post and commenting on a post because they didn't have any contact information anywhere. So no email, no phone number, nothing. If I wanted to talk to tech support, I had to pay $10 to sign up to get into that system as a paid experience, like to paid feature. So that was a really big deterrent for me. And I wound up having to comment into Facebook saying, hey, I need to reset an email. And they said, go ahead and reach out to accounts at MailChimp.com. So I did that. I still haven't heard back. It's very frustrating. A week's gone by and I just want to use that same email address, but I can't. And so this is a very common thing you see where people bury their customer service or they make it really, really hard for you to get a hold of them. And then when you do, I'm sure you guys are all familiar of calling a company and you get put into these automated responses and you get so infuriated and you're just wanting to talk to a human being and you can't, and there's nothing that you can do except for go in these loops, and you just get really, really upset and angry with the customer. So customer service has got to be something that I feel personally affects all of us when we have the need of tech support. We just want to talk to customer service about something, or if we just want to give feedback. There should be a really easy way to get a hold of people and to feel like you're being heard and listened to and responded to quickly.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I think this is a great example, because even larger companies sometimes really fail at this.
Right, exactly.
I'm
So
not
here I
gonna
am.
go-
Exactly. I have Land's End and MailChimp as my two examples. So this is my personal experience. So last month I was shopping on Land's End. The summer's coming up and I was looking at clothing, and they sent me a catalog that was really nice. And in that was a 40% off coupon that was an inserted thing that I was like, oh, this is great. How great. So I went online and I found a bunch of stuff to buy, and I was going to use my coupon. But I needed to measure something. I kind of hesitated and left my cart, right? So the coupon expired, and so I was like, well, let's try contacting customer service, because as an internet user, I'm pretty aware that if you contact customer service, a lot of times they can help you, right? So I chatted with customer service, and they offered me a new 40% off coupon, and I was really, really happy. I actually wrote in and chatted, I am so thrilled with your service, thank you so much. I was really, really happy. And then I started changing my mind on what was in the cart, and going back and forth, and I realized on the website there was a 50% coupon, and I was kind of irritated at the customer service agent for not offering me an upgrade from the 40 to 50% that was running at the same time on that day. So here I am going, okay, there's a new coupon, and when I try to pop open this pin I needed, that window opened up with an error, and I was like, ugh. So I had to go back and I had to get into chat a second time with customer service, as it wasn't working. And then I finally got the coupon to work. But it left me with a great example of what the user experience was. My experience as a customer was like, why do I need this PIN? Obviously, it's some type of tracking thing that they're trying to do from where am I in the United States or whatever. But they have a lot of my information already. I thought it was an excessive thing to need this PIN, especially when it didn't pop up correctly on the website for the second coupon that I was trying to use. And so it became like a challenge, these hurdles I had to get through. And the emotional response I had from this was, I still like Land's End. Their customer service was very nice. So a couple days later, I wound up having to return something, and I contacted customer service, and on the phone call with the lady, I said, just to let you know, this is what happened. I'm actually thinking about using you guys in my user experience design, presentation. And she kind of laughed and said, well, we're not allowed to give out coupons. And I said, well, that's very interesting, your policies within the company can actually really impact how the customers are feeling and what the response is on how the corporation is either failing you or lifting you up and towards a better experience. And this just gives you an example of Land's End's a huge company. They have great customer service, but they're still having some issues where I felt like they could be improved. So it kind of gives you a really good example of what it means to have a customer's experience.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I won't even go into, I feel like if you even, thinking of MailChimp, I think I've talked to a lot of people about Facebook's issue with this idea that if you're using something for free, you should have no expectation.
Right.
I struggle with that a lot, because I'm like, it's the business's choice to give away certain things for free. And I'm not so sure. I think the greatest, kind of trend that we have going on is, well, if we do it for free, then we can just basically leave you and say, we're not going to help you at all, no matter what happens.
This whole $10 to contact technical support was not a very good incentive for me to sign up and love them forever. It was kind of like this big hurdle that they put in the way. And part of the experience was that I was frustrated, and you don't want to do that to your customers. So this quote says, there is now a sense of urgency to prioritize user experience, both for mobile and desktop user, and to some degree abandon traditional SEO practices. While some tactics still may be effective, such as building internal and external links, satisfying visitors now takes priority. And that's totally true. Facebook has put out their guidelines, and so has Google. And basically what they're saying is that the person on the other end, their experience is now basically trumping everything else you can do for your website, and everything else you can do. It's got to be a great experience for them, first and foremost.
Yeah, and we did a previous digital drop-in, Justin and I, on search engine optimization and how this industry has really changed and how we have to change our perception about SEO. I think a lot of people still have this very antiquated perception of what SEO is, and I think it's much more linked into the slide we're looking at right now.
Exactly. I mean, that's why I'm saying that the priority now is, yes, your SEO has to be important for all your keywords and everything you're doing with your metadata. They consider all of that part of how good your site's built, right? The foundation of your site has to be a good design. But the priority for them is also the site, how fast it's loading. So that really needs to be an important factor that you have to consider, which of course means working on your images and other things that we'll get into. Now, CTAs are call to actions. You want to make sure that you're really prompting people to do what you want them to do, and how do you want to do business with them is a really good, important question to answer here. And also accessibility, which means basically you want to make sure you're being ADA compliant throughout the website as well. So this is an example of a website. I was just, looking the other day for poor examples of websites, just so you can see the difference between a professional user interface and one that's not really well done. So I looked for some web design companies in Atlanta, because sometimes web design companies are the worst of them all. And I happened to find this one, which really was funny. And the first thing that happened is that this is the landing page and how it came up with this notification on the left. And I laughed. I said, oh my gosh, there's some kind of a weird notification. Now I'm in Chrome, I'm on a Mac, I'm doing stuff that's totally normal. I haven't seen this notification thing in a long time. I'm not even sure what's going on there. So of course it's kind of like this weird kind of error thing that pops up, right? So I took a screenshot of what I first see when I landed on the home page. And as you can see, they probably have no idea that this notification is happening, or what's causing it. I'm not even sure what's going on. But I need to click allow to continue to look. That was just really strange. And then you can see their little branding is their little tiny logo that looks like a lotus in the front. And I can't even tell what the name of the company is here. I think it's actually called Web Design Atlanta. And, the interface to me was just really poorly done. The covers were horrendous. If you were colorblind, this green and red would just be, something that you can't even see. The contrast is poor. And it was just a really poorly laid out website. So it was a great example of how your first impression on a homepage is so crucial to make it look professional. So that was just kind of an example of what not to do. So these are some examples of what I call roadblocks and time wasters. As a user experience designer, what I go through, and as I do an audit on your website, a lot of times things like these forms, I did a quick search for plumber, because I knew that they usually don't have great websites. And sure enough, on the third website, I found this contact form that had some required fields. They required your name, your phone number, and your email. Then they required you to have a message, which I thought was kind of unnecessary, right? And then they also made me do math. That's my biggest pet peeve, is when someone has like a really complex CAPTCHA or a math to contact you. Making these roadblocks really slows down and really irritates the customer. What you want to do is not try to frustrate people or take up their time. A lot of people just want to, check off a couple things and send things in really quickly. The second example is when you have two email addresses. So re-entering an email address is redundant. It doesn't really need to happen anymore. And then the third example, this chat window I had the other day popped up, and it said, please complete this form and click start chat. And so they put in first name, last name, and then they require your email, and then they're asking you for an initial question. And if you guys know anything about chats and you've tried to chat with customer service, you know that that's going to be asked again what your question is, and it's going to be this whole thing you have to fill out. What you really want to do is have a chat window so that's really easy just to start chatting with someone right away, that you don't need to give out your whole, first and last name as well. It just seems too much information.
I was going to say, one of my pet peeves is when I chat with different companies, sometimes it asks me for this information. So it's like first name, last name, email, what's your problem? And then when the person gets on the chat, they're like,
What's your problem? Exactly.
And I'm like, why do I have to repeat myself?
It's the same thing when you go to the doctors. They have you fill out these forms and they make you say it and fill it out again. And you're just like, this is ridiculous. So again, user experience design goes into every aspect of our lives. This is a great example too for using online chat. So I've noticed an uptick in using AI throughout chatbots and so forth. So I wanted to give some examples of this. Crazy Egg does an egg bot, and so does Drift. They have a Drift bot. And here's a true story of a user experience. So one day I was having some technical issues on a website that I was using, some type of service, and I got upset because I lost a bunch of work or something. I was emotional. And I started chatting with customer service, and I was going back and forth, and I poured my heart and soul into this chat to kind of make them feel bad for the situation, to help me out, to really care about my situation. And after about 5 minutes, I realized I was chatting with a bot. And I was so like, are you kidding me? I am so upset right now because here I am giving all this emotion emotion to a bot, and it felt like I was kind of betrayed by the system, and I wanted just to kind of let people know, if you do use chatbots, it's probably a good idea to make sure people realize that it's not a human being, because we do tend to talk differently to a chatbot than a human being. And when we are talking to a human, we try to have different conversations, and we have a different way of speaking to somebody. I also like chatbots that have like this kind of choice stuff that also helps speed up conversations and answer people's questions. So you see that now on Facebook, where you have the company profiles will pop up and say, what are your hours? And you have these choices and so forth. So people can answer questions very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most frustrating things, is when you think you've got a person on the other end of the line and then you realize you don't, that it's just auto answering you with different things.
Exactly. So I love this quote. How fast your website loads is critical, but often a completely ignored element in any online business that includes search marketing and search engine optimization. And that includes page load times on mobile devices. The average time it takes to fully load a mobile landing page is 22 seconds, according to a new analysis. Yet 53% of all visitors are abandoned if a mobile site takes longer than 3 seconds to load. And that's a big problem. So going into Google Dev Tools, you can see that speed is the number one thing we're working on. So today we're going to talk about how to speed up your website. So your website is actually slowed down by images. They're pretty much the number one killer of anything we do. As you can guess, that the kilobytes for JPEGs can sometimes exceed 1 megabyte if you're not paying attention to the size of images. And if you have a lot of images, they will slow down a website. Third-party integrations. So things like Instagram. If you have an Instagram feed on your homepage or anywhere in your website, what that's doing is it's pinging Instagram to then get that current information, and it takes a few seconds for it to go get that information, so it's adding some load time. So the more third-party integrations you have on the website, especially on the homepage, it can really drag down your time. Now, of course, videos, they also are usually larger in file size and also do a big bandwidth download problem. And then also, of course, if you have tons of content. One of the other things that I forget to mention in this presentation is kind of content overwhelm. So tons of content also can be really bad things when you have too many choices, way too much going on, just tons and tons of content, and trying to lead them in every direction at once. That's kind of bad UX as well. And also too many fonts. One of the things that I've done a lot of research on is how to speed up a website. And one of the answers is that fonts, when you're trying to load them, that still has to go ping, and that browser needs to load different fonts. So if you have 3, 4, or 5 fonts throughout the website, you're loading a bunch of different fonts. So how to test your speed. We listed here some great resources for you to go back and plug in your website URL. All you have to do is go to these links and type in www.whateveryourdomain.com, and it will take a few seconds. It'll actually give you back a whole report. It has all kinds of analytics that come with it. It will tell you what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. It will give you a whole bunch of tips on how to fix things. And also, just a reminder, you want to benchmark these speed tests. What I suggest is the best way to do it is to screenshot them and put them in a folder so you can go back and kind of compare from when you started looking at your site speed to where you are now and how to improve it, because little changes can make a huge difference sometimes. And of course, you want to make sure your website loads in 4 seconds or less. So I'm a graphics expert. That's kind of my thing. I spend a lot of time as a graphic designer and user interface designer working with graphics. So I wanted to go over a little bit of the image file types, because not everybody gets into the real nitty-gritty of what these mean. So I just wanted to put up on the screen that, JPEGs are really, really common. Most of you, of course, are going to be very familiar with them. They're universally accepted on all browsers and all platforms. So they're probably the number one thing you're going to be working with. GIFs are great for animation. PNGs are really what the industry is using right now for any transparent images. But you got to note, sometimes PNGs can get really, really big. Then there's PDFs, which I'm sure most of you have heard of before, but these are mostly on a file that you upload to the website that can be downloaded. They're also printable and can be editable in Illustrator. And TIFFs, they're the best quality for print. They're made to have the most information within an image. Now there's a new image format called WebP images that Google's working on, and it's Google's its own little baby that they're putting out there. And it's just coming out, and what's happening with these things is that there's ways to code in WebP images to basically take your JPEGs and your PNGs, and it will convert them into these WebP images. And there's a WordPress plugin for this, and what it basically does is it reduces your images by about 26%. So it keeps them at the same visual beauty, as it were, but it really reduces them in file size. And one of my favorite things to talk about is scalable vector graphics. So scalable vector graphics are a vector graphic, so hopefully you know the difference between a pixel and a vector. But when you're exporting from Illustrator, you can actually get the code, and it's kind of cool. So an SVG file is actually XML code. All right, so this gets into how to speed up your site. So what you want to do with your JPEGs is definitely make sure when you're exporting them, that smaller ones on the website, you want to make sure they're 50 kilobytes or less. Ideally, like I know that banners are much larger. Sometimes you're looking at a 1,500 pixel wide banner or something. You want to make sure those are around 200 kilobytes. Ideally smaller if you can. As you can see, you can also run your images through compressor.io or tinyping.com, which will also reduce your file sizes once you've already exported it. I use Photoshop to export all my images so I can control the kilobytes that we're looking at and also see the visual, what it's going to look like. I want to make sure that it's going to look great on a Retina display, but also be really quick to load. So there's a combination of doing that. You also want to name your images correctly for SEO. So you want to use your keywords in your JPEG. So also note, when you're dealing with SVGs, these particular things, you can put the SVG file up in your code, but you can also have these code blocks. And when you do the code blocks, because it's XML, they can conflict. So you have to make sure that when you do have these code blocks in your website, that the ID tags are correct. Another way to speed up your website is to lazy load your images and videos, which we'll get into a little bit. And of course, using these WebP images for WordPress plugin. Now note that WebP images are not quite ready for every browser, so you need to do backup coding to have images that will fall into place if the WebP images are not loading.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that how your website is built and who designed it really affects like which things you can execute versus not execute. Exactly.
So I work on Squarespace, and so I can't use a WordPress plugin, for example. So, every platform has its abilities to do different things. With lazy loading, it's basically a jQuery plugin that's written in JavaScript. So you're using code right now that will help not load images is really what it does. It delays the loading of the images on any longer web page, and if you're not scrolling down, those images don't display. So as you kind of scroll down, what you see is kind of a gray box that says preview image or something, and it changes into the images. And you might go, oh yeah, I've seen that before. Like on a lot of times, shopping sites that have lots of products will use lazy loading because they're trying to load a huge category of lots of images, and so lazy loading can be really great. You can also learn to do lazy loading for videos. So there's different ways of doing that by even taking a screenshot of the video and pretending it's the video and then launching the video once you play it. There's all different types of plugins for this type of thing, and that can really improve your Google page speed score. Now, this is how you export an SVG from Illustrator. When you're actually in Illustrator and you have, let's say, your logo file. Now, I want to point out, SVGs are only good for vector-based art, so they don't work for any type of photograph. So your logo can be done in a vector format in Illustrator, and that's where you would want to start learning how to do this. When you hit the export to save the item, the logo, you have this ability at the bottom to save it out as a SVG file, or you can actually save out the code. And I just wanted to show you this. It pops open this text box, which is this XML code, and this is what you can actually put into your website, which would then display your logo. So a lot of the logos on my website are actually these code blocks. There's no image file at all. It's just XML, and because it's XML, you can actually animate your SVG files. It's actually really kind of cool. So just keep in mind, those are really, really small as well. A lot of times our logo files are like 5 kilobytes, and they resize to any dimension without any loss. And so they look really crisp on every high definition machine. So when we're talking about making things look really good, SVG files for your logos are like imperative. When you're getting to mobile UX, we talk about, of course you need to upgrade all your images to be faster to load. And I really highly encourage the use of SVG files because a lot of us have a logo. You also want to make sure that all the emails and phone numbers on the site will launch when they're touched. That's something I do as part of my UX audit for people is when I go through their website, I also do their mobile site. I can't tell you how many times where I'm going through the contact page and the phone number doesn't launch the phone and the email doesn't launch an email. Yeah. And those are really basic, easy things for you to do to format to make sure that your user experience is great on the mobile.
Yeah, and click to call is so easy to add even by yourself. That's something that I look at a lot of times, especially because I still have a lot of customers from the website side of my business where a phone call is what really is going to close the deal for them. And I'm like, well, then we want them to be able to click on that and have it immediately work.
Exactly. And so that kind of leads right into this, the goals. Like, so how do you want to do business with people is a really important thing. Like, do you want them to email you? Do you want them to fill out a form? Do you want them to pick up the phone? We all have our preference on how we want to do business, especially the small businesses in this area. We all have a way that we prefer, right? So you want to make sure that your site's kind of really geared towards that and making sure those call to actions lead them to do what you want them to do by adding these call to actions throughout the website and so forth. And you want to really figure out who is your audience at this point. Who are you targeting? So that you want to create what's called a user persona, which is kind of a fictional character that you look at your analytics and you kind of figure out who your customers are. And a lot of times the analytics will tell you your demographics, where they're coming in, who they are, what age groups they are, what gender they are, and a little bit more about them. And that kind of gives you an idea of where to begin. Most companies know who their clients are too. You kind of have a good sense of what age group you're kind of hitting. So you want to make sure that everything you design is for these people. You don't want to just, market to everyone, because then you're not marketing to anyone. So again, we want to have consistency across all your marketing channels and test your website. So one of my things is, you got to go back and test your forms and try to become a customer. That's one of the things you should do right away, is like pretend you don't know anything about you. Search for yourself on Google, see how your marketing looks when you see your title tags, click through. Does it make sense? Do you know where to go? Have you done a really good job of basically guiding them through the website, and is it easy to do? Sometimes I talk about the drunk test. Like, if you had someone who's really, really drunk, could they use your website? And that's kind of how you want to make it super easy for people to do. So,
well, I sometimes think it's really important, because I work with a lot of small businesses too, that they get some people they trust and they ask them to go through and do something.
Yeah.
I'm like, even if you asked 3 people that just hadn't been looking at the website all day, or hadn't worked on it for months and months, or haven't been managing it for 3 years, ask them to go tell you, because once you've worked on a website for a while, you're no longer the greatest gauge of how usable it is anymore.
Exactly. Asking people to do that for you is fantastic. And I sometimes use my father-in-law, who's 79 years old, and say, can you use this app? Can you navigate this website? And he's a really good baseline, because he's also colorblind, and I really care about how he can see and do things on the web.
So I know we've got a few other points in here, but we are getting close to the wrap of the call. So I want to make sure, if you have questions, that you take the next 5 minutes or so and type them in. But there are a few other slides in here that Heather's added, and I wish we had all day to talk about this subject, because there's so much more that we could dig into. But while we're just seeing if anybody wants to chat in questions, Heather, let's go through the last few things that I think are valuable tools for people to kind of understand, that are part of how you sort of discover your website usability.
Okay. So journey mapping, of course, is something a UX designer can do, which is literally making a timeline of events from where they come in from Google, where else are they coming in, perhaps a postcard, whatever. And you make these different points on this timeline, and it can be in any different way you can design this. But what you want to do is really focus on, okay, where are we touching the customer? What are we doing at that touch point? And what could we be doing better throughout this entire process? My goal is to make sure that when I work with a company, that they get a 5-star review from their customer. So you want to make sure you're also asking for that 5-star review, and that you're following up with the customer, and the customer is like really starting to become a brand advocate, and is going to start doing word of mouth and raving about you and kind of telling people about you. And that's kind of my goal as well, is to tell people, if you can put that journey into a timeline, you can really see what's happening straightforward. What you're seeing on the screen right now is using the company called Hotjar. It's a third-party integration. Just note that it will add a second to your load time. So I recommend using it for about 3 months, and then maybe taking it off your website. But what you can do is you can actually see things that are called heat maps. And a heat map, in short, is a graphical representation of the data that shows the most popular hot and unpopular cold elements of a website page. And basically you can see right away where the hottest elements are, as the most views and interaction in red. And you can immediately spot what your users are clicking on, scrolling through, or ignoring.
So I like this question right here, which is how do you balance UX best practices with some of the legal issues that sort of force you to include time wasters like double opt-ins?
Oh, yeah. Well, GDPR compliant is one of the biggest questions we have right now because I have been really focusing on making sure those that need to be GDPR compliant or AB 375 compliant, which are new laws in California, they do require data protection stuff, which does require a lot more hoops to jump through for the clients. And it is kind of a decision I've personally made to not make them do that if I don't have to. If you're small enough and you don't need to comply and so forth, my recommendation is try to make it better for the user at this point until you kind of get into the big boy level of having to do things. Now, if you have to do things, that's unfortunate, but what you can do is kind of maybe make it fun or make it a little bit less, intrusive,
Well, yeah, Cooper, just to answer that last piece, which you thought there was something similar in the U.S. too. Yeah, that's what Heather just said about the California law that just went through.
Yeah, it's called the AB 375, and it basically is in effect now, even though it goes into effect, in air quotes, this January 1st, it's actually already in effect as of now. And what that means is that you have, the common denominator for everybody who has to worry about it is if you have 50,000 data points collected, which is basically ideally, it's going to be IP addresses. And so if you have over 50,000 IP addresses, you're already you're now liable for this law coming in. So that's what's happening out there. But also 2 more states are entering that arena as well. So as we go forward, data protection is going to be an issue that does interfere with a lot of these newsletter sign-up boxes and how we do business with people.
Absolutely. And so just going over some of these last final tools, we just talked about journey maps, heat maps, session recordings is another
this
one.
Actually is really kind of funny. I actually watched myself working one day because I had installed the software and I kind of replayed myself working on the website. So you can actually watch someone what they actually do on the website, which is kind of fun. It's weird. It's kind of a neat thing to do. And basically they record all your mouse movements, your clicks, your taps, any type of scrolling, and it shows you what to do and also on desktop and mobile.
Megan, I see your question here. A lot of the recommendations that we've made involve testing and revising existing websites. Can you talk, Heather, really quickly about when somebody's getting ready to produce a brand new website, they've never had one before.
Right.
What should they do to kind of think about the UX best practices?
Okay, so first of all, what you want to do is find someone who's really familiar with what user experience is, because it's not just something that you can just know all overnight. But you do want to start off with what I call wireframing. Wireframing is an industry practice where you want to start off in programs that are made to just do really basic, no graphics, no branding, just the pages or the web, or the app screens. And with these screens, you can lay out every single screen in the website or an app, and you can kind of decide what's going to happen on those and where they should either swipe or click or what's the action to get to the next stage. And it really, you should be doing this before you begin anything, because in the wireframing process, you can share animated videos with somebody of what the process would look like, and we can all as a team go back in and say, that screen's unnecessary, or don't make them do that, that's redundant, and before you code anything, you should be wireframing everything you work, especially when you're doing mobile apps. That's absolutely crucial.
So again, going back, and let us know, Megan, if that answers your question or if you're looking for more detail. I think, the hard thing about, and I just want to throw this out there, the hard thing about how do we implement before we've actually built a website, like for a startup or something like that, is that truthfully, a lot of it in the beginning is speculation. Like you can read the studies, you can read the data that people give you about, best practices and all of that. Then you build a website to meet those things. You do the wireframing Heather's talking about. But then I feel like once you get the brand new website live, you actually still have to go through that testing process.
Exactly. So what's up on the screen is Hotjar's surveys, which is actually a pop-up that you can control when and where it comes up, and you can ask different questions. And you're actually asking the people on your website, is there anything wrong with it? And it's kind of a nice way of getting feedback. And it's just one example of that you can ask people to do an experience with your website by giving you feedback by this kind of thing. And I actually had something wrong on the website that I took a screenshot of, and I wrote back a whole thing about, actually this is being cut off right now, just to let you know I'm on Chrome on Mac, this is not working, and I sent it in. And so I wanted to say that I contributed to this company's Hotjar experience by writing back a survey. But that's something you can do as well. Of course, you want to ask you want to bring these people in too, like ask them these questions, you know?
Yeah, and I want to say too, from my perspective, it's important that a lot of times I think people believe, they're going to build the website, it needs to be perfect, and then they launch it. And a lot of times I'm really encouraging companies to get away from that perspective, because number one, it isn't going to be perfect, because you're going to be serving a bunch of people and not all of them are going to like it. And so I think we have to sort of shift our perspective to really say, you know what, we build the website, we get it as far as we can get it in-house, then we make it live, and then we invite people to be part of the process.
Exactly.
And to your point at the very beginning when we were setting up the call, basically figuring out how do we actually then continue to evolve the website. It should be organically growing.
I was going to say, it never ever ends.
time.
You never stop working on your website. If you've stopped working on your website, you need to start working on your website, because it can always be better. And one of the things we need to do is, when we are having customer feedback, is that they will find everything wrong with your website. So your best, testers out there are actually your clients who are saying, hey, this is broken, it doesn't work. And that is the way it works in the world, is that unfortunately we can't catch everything that's wrong with our websites and everything that's not the best convenient things, but usually you find out what's wrong by people finding those errors on your site.
Yeah. And so I see Cooper and Megan, both your comments. Cooper's saying one thing they do is map out every bit of the architecture before they actually build the website. And I'm sorry, let me just go down here. And then they create the home page as an executive summary that replaces navigation in the mobile view. Oh, and I'm sorry. I guess I'm a little confused about who's talking here. But then I see these other comments about creating workflows and experience maps that show how users will navigate the website or app to complete tasks or locate information. And then they also text wireframes and visual prototypes with users, or test them before development, so that revisions can be made prior to engineers spending time on development. And so, yeah, I think all of that is on point to
Exactly.
me.
You want to test as much as possible and test again. I mean, it's imperative to go through everything. And you want to map everything out and figure out, before you code anything, you should be really thinking about the architecture, of course.
Yeah, so I think, a lot of people, what they don't really understand is that a big part of the process is, putting these things in place ahead of time and really doing some planning before you get to that coding space. And Sarah, I see your question. Do you ever do on-site research? That's personally your favorite step.
Yeah, well, it depends on the client, of course. But if they have a physical brick and mortars, it's always imperative to go there and get, see and walk around and do stuff. As a user experience designer, you can basically audit anybody and anything they're doing. So if I could do an audit on a restaurant, for example, and basically be a client and come in and see what's easy to do, what's not easy to do. And there's definitely ways that you can improve things no matter who you are. There's always something you can do to make it easier and nicer for people.
Awesome. And so I want to let everybody know we'll stay here and keep answering questions. But for the rest of you, because I know we're already over time, and like I said, I love talking to Heather. This is what we geek out on when we're alone pretty much all the time. So this conversation can go forever, and I really appreciate, Heather, you taking the time out to be with us today.
Yep.
So for those of you who have to log off, again, you'll get a recording as well as the slides so that you can dig through these in more information. And then, hey, Sarah, thanks so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. For those of you that are still on the call, we're going to leave you with this final kind of quote from Google. There's also a list that Heather's included of web-safe fonts that you can refer to if you'd like to in the future. And one other topic that hopefully we'll be covering in a future digital drop-in is accessibility. And accessibility, I think, is a really important piece when it comes to UX and specifically website usability, but it is a whole topic unto itself that I think deserves a full call.
Yeah,
to discuss,
I completely agree.
Yeah, to discuss ADA compliance and how that affects web design at this point in the game. So you want to just talk quickly about the final takeaways?
Yeah, so these takeaways are kind of just like the highlights of everything we talked about today. I mean, you really want to just focus on making sure that you design for the customer, not for your company. You want to make it really easy for them to do business with you. You want to make sure that you help guide them through the entire process. You want to have amazing customer service and everything we talked about for site speed, SEO, and ADA compliance, and of course, making sure you export your images correctly. And I really highly recommend using SVG files if you can, and then also making sure everything looks professional and branded. That's really a crucial piece of all of this. So kind of putting all these together is going to be a really good start for your user experience.
Great. And so again, thank you all so much for being here today. If you have any other questions, again, Heather and I will stay here, but I want to encourage you to feel free to reach out to me at Sarah, SARAH, at jbmediagroupllc.com. And you will have all my information on this final slide in the presentation. So you can learn more about the JB Media Institute, but also contact me directly if you have other questions. So don't hesitate to reach out in the future if I can be of service. And thanks so much for being here, Bill. So thank you all again. Have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to talking to you at our next digital drop-in on June 5th.